which is war in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. Because we believe that when they're saying that these people are so desperate, but actually the way you need to think about this motion is basically a threshold. For example, the government, like what this said, the government is committing suicide, committing genocide, for example. They go to war, the United Nations go to war or create an extreme measures to this country, because it's not because there is no democracy inside that country, but because of the genocides that has happened, because of the human rights violation that has happened in that country, ladies and gentlemen. It's not because the government itself, we acknowledge that the government may be failed to actually fulfilling the society needs, but there's severe problems, which is human rights violation, ladies and gentlemen, and the United Nations should do an extreme measures to deal with this issue. While we cannot change the regime itself, we cannot change the democratic, for example, the democratic, democratic value, impose the democratic value to this country. But before that,
the genocide and all this cost that you're talking about is actually an embedded effect of a dictatorship government. Exactly the thing that we're fighting for.
Well, dictatorship, for example, they're doing genocides. It's not only because there's no democracy inside. There's no democracy inside the country, ladies and gentlemen. For example, you just want someone to be diminished because you attack them, or because they don't agree to your opinion. That's what the authoritarian government do, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that a lot of non-democratic countries, for example, like China, for example, like the other countries which is non-democratic, this is actually a significant part of the international community, ladies and gentlemen. When you put war, when you impose this to this particular country, they would be afraid of you. They would be afraid that the liberal democratic country which will impose their values into your country. And what will happen is actually the international community will have a distrust towards each other, ladies and gentlemen. Because the liberal democratic is trying to impose their values, ladies and gentlemen. We believe the value of democracy itself lies in the hands of citizens, ladies and gentlemen. It is shown, for example, by the election process, the dissenting opinion to the government, etc. The democracy is not only happen because you impose an institution to be there, ladies and gentlemen, or changes of a regime, but also an eagerness and enthusiastic society inside the country who wants to have a democracy, ladies and gentlemen. This value is something which cannot be imposed. It's something gradual to be learned, ladies and gentlemen. War means that you impose certain institutions inside the country, ladies and gentlemen. That you want to change the regime directly, ladies and gentlemen. When you put guns on their head, what they would think is that the first, society might think that you are the bad guys, therefore they would act against you, ladies and gentlemen. For example, the rebellious actions towards the government, or the rebellious actions like what happened in Iraq, ladies and gentlemen, where there is a strong nationalistic value inside the Iraqi citizen itself. They fight back to the United States of America. What happened is that you put stronger reasons for them to fight you back, and that's not good for the peacekeeping force. And the second of all, the society might do what you want without any eagerness. What will happen is that the war means what will happen is that the citizens or maybe are not ready to accept the value. For example, in Iraq again, the sufferer from the war itself democratic value, because we believe liberal democratic value is maybe good and maybe in some ways bad, because we don't know what happened inside the country, what happened inside the society